Hey everybody, welcome back to another tutorial series. In this one, I'm going to show you how to draw hair using pastel pencils. And so we're going to be drawing blonde hair in this tutorial series, and we're going to be doing it using brown pastel paper. You can use any color pastel paper that you have for this tutorial, but I am using brown paper because this was the color that I had available to me. But I would recommend using a toned paper rather than a white paper, so a toned grey or any sort of mid-tone value. But if you do only have white, then that's okay as well. I just like having a mid-tone value because the highlights really stand out and so do the shadows, whereas when you have white paper, the lightest highlight is already there for you, and so you can't see those highlights as much and you have to just work from light to dark. So I've already got the sketch outline down on my paper, and the sketch outline will be attached so that you can sketch it out beforehand and get ready for this tutorial series. And also the reference image is attached as well so that you guys can follow along with me every step of the way. Now I'm only going to be using 5 colours for this, and all of the materials that I'm using will be listed in the description, but I'm really not using that many supplies for this drawing. So it's a great one to try if you're a beginner because you don't need loads of different materials. So like I said, I'm using the brown pastel matte paper. You can use any pastel paper that you want, or any paper that's like a mixed media and will take pastels really well. So you definitely want a paper that has a bit more tooth to it because the pastel really needs some texture to cling onto. So don't use a paper that's too smooth for pastels. But this paper is quite expensive, so don't worry if you don't have this exact one. So I'm going to go through now the pencils that I'll be using. Here they are. Let's put them in a nice order. And so like I said, I'm only using 5 colours for this, but you can use even less if you want. So the first colour that I'll be using is this very, very light ivory colour. And I am using the Stabilo Carbothello pastel pencils. And so this is a very light ivory cream tone. So I'll just swatch it out here for you guys. And you can see that because it's a really light colour, it shows up really well against the brown paper. So this is the shade 105 from the Stabilo Carbothello range. The next colour that I'll be using will be to deepen up those highlights a little bit more. This is a little more yellow tone, so we're getting a little bit dark with this one. And this is the 692. I'll just swatch this as well. You can see it's a much deeper colour and a much more yellow tone. And actually that lighter colour looks very white in comparison to this yellow tone. So you can use any sort of yellow colour that you have. I've made sure not to get too much of a bright pencil. For example, here's another yellow for comparison, and you can see that this is very neon in comparison to this one. So you want a nice neutral yellow cream tone. Now here we've got a nice brown ochre colour. It's a nice mid-tone golden brown, and this is the 615. You can see that this one is a very similar colour to the brown paper, so this will make a great mid-tone value. Then to darken up those darkest shadows, we've got a nice dark brown. This is the 610. So a dark brown or a dark umber will be great for this. You can see that's darker than the paper. And then for the darkest shadows, we've got just a black here. And this is from the Lyra range, a Lyra black pastel, but you can use one from the Stabilo Carbothello set because I'm just not using it because I don't have it. I ran out of that one. And so this is just a nice black, and that will be just for the couple of areas, especially right at the top where the roots are, that are a bit darker. Now the first thing that I want to show you before we dive into this full study is I just want to show you what process and the steps that we're going to be going through to build up the lock of hair. So I'm going to go through on this little patch here, this left hand side. I'm going to show you the process that we're going to use throughout this whole hair to build up a realistic look. So we'll be going in first with the lightest value, the lightest colour, which is the 105, and we'll start by using this to block in the highlights. So I'm just going to do a little lock of hair here, and when we're drawing in the strands of hair and building up the volume for the hair, we're going to be going in lines, as you can see, that are sweeping with the direction hair's going in. And we're just going to use this colour to build up a nice base value for the hair. Okay, and that will be step 1. And then the next step is we'll use our lighter yellow tone, so our second colour here, and we'll use that to add a bit more vibrancy to the hair and to start building up those darker colours. So I'll mainly focus this at either end, and then because the lock of hair here is more highlighted in the middle, I'll ease off the colour as I get towards the middle to create more of a highlight in the centre. And then we're going to go in with our mid-tone, so the brown ochre, and we'll use this to add in some mid-tones and some of the shadows. And once again, I'm using lines that are sweeping with the direction the hair is going in. And I'm mainly targeting this either end where the lock of hair is more shadowed. Then I'll switch back to my lighter colour and use it just to fill in any areas where we can still see the brown paper showing through where the highlights are supposed to be. So for the first step, we just added a light sort of value, a light layer, and now we're going more intense with these highlights. You can also switch back to that second colour just to go over and transition from those mid-tones into those highlights a bit better. Okay, for blending we'll be using a cotton bud, and you just sweep a cotton bud over the pastel, and you can see that it gets rid of any graininess and gives us a really nice smooth layer. You can see that this is a really nice base layer now, and we've got the highlights in the middle and we've got those darker tones at the end. And now I'll go back in with the mid-tone, this brown ochre, and just go over those shadows again. And you can add a few shadows going more towards the middle to add a bit more texture to your hair. There we go. And now I'm going to go in with that darker tone. So this is the dark brown. I'm going to use this to get in some even darker shadows. So the brown is for the darkest areas. And you don't want to draw in every strand of hair when you're drawing hair. You just want to work on it as a mass of hair. And finally, if you need to, you can use the black for the darkest areas. You shouldn't need to use the black in too many areas. And you can even go back over the black with the brown to make it look more natural. I'm also going back in with that brown ochre to ease those shadows into the lighter areas. And you can blend over it a bit more if you need to with the cotton bud, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to take the lightest colour and use this to add in some flyaway hairs. And what's great about pastels is that they layer nicely on top of each other, and you can layer lighter colours over darker colours, which really helps to give a 3D look. So I'm adding a sweeping bit of hair coming over the side of this lock. And you can blend where that highlight goes onto the brown paper where it looked a bit grainy. And I'm just going to add a bit of mid-tone to that bit of hair. But now we've just gone through the steps and how you can build up some realistic hair, just a simple lock of hair. And now we're going to go through how we can do that for the full hair study. So to start off with, we're going to go in with the 105, the lightest colour, and I'm going to work from the top of the hair and work my way down. And remember, at this sort of stage, we're just adding in a very light base layer. And you don't need to add this colour to the darkest areas. For example, right at the top of the hair here, the roots are really dark, so we don't need to add this pencil in that area. But I am adding this colour to most of the mid-tones and the lightest areas. And this will just help us to establish the shapes of the hair and get in a nice base layer on the hair. Some areas you may want to add more of this colour to than others. For example, areas that are more mid-tones and you know you need to add a lot more darker colours, you might not want to add as much of this because you want to leave the tooth of the paper available to grip onto those darker colours. And what's great about having a mid-tone colour for your paper is that we've got darker values in here, which can make it easier to judge where you need to add highlights. When we did this first swatch, you probably noticed that it didn't really look like a lot until we added in, at least the third colour. So at this stage, it's not really going to look like much, and don't worry if it doesn't. That's completely normal. And what's great about pastels is that they are such a forgiving medium. You can layer and layer different colours over the top. So if you do make any mistakes, it's really easy to fix with pastels. What I loved about this reference is there's so much motion in the hair. It was going in so many different directions, and I thought it'd be a really interesting study to have a go at. Her hair is really long, so we're doing really long pencil strokes, whereas if you were drawing, for example, a shaved hair, so if he or she has got an area where it's really short or shaved, then you'd use much shorter pencil strokes. Whereas here, because her hair is really long, we need to make sure that we're using long, fluid, continuous lines. Don't stop and start lots with your lines. Otherwise it won't look as natural and as fluid and flowing. You want to make sure that you do use long, continuous lines. And you don't need to necessarily worry about all these little bits going over the top. I didn't actually need to worry about those as much. I have got them in, but you don't need to, because like we did here, we can add them over the top. So it'd probably have been a lot easier if I didn't get those in. It's okay. sure you go right to the little ends as well. Now I'm going to switch to using the second colour, this lighter colour. It's the 692. And we're going to start to use this to add more vibrancy to the hair, and we're going to use this to build up some of those darker colours. So we're going to be adding this to most of these lighter areas, apart from where the brightest highlights are. There's quite a few highlights over on this side. But really, you can just have fun with it because you can adjust anything. If you need to brighten something up a bit more, you can just go in and tweak it. If you need to add a bit more shadow, you can do that with pastels. What I love about pastels is that you can just have fun with them and you don't have to worry because no mistake is permanent, which I think is really, really great. And also with pastels, because they blend out so smoothly, you don't need to worry about any graininess because that can easily be taken care of, which means that you don't have to apply any pressure to your pencil. So do not worry at all about any graininess. You may notice that I'm trying to work from the top of the drawing down to the bottom. And this is to help prevent smudging. It's not as big of a deal in this one because my hand is never touching the area of pastel. But if you're doing a whole piece and you're working over here and you had pastel here, then you'll be more likely to smudge it. So that's why I try and work from the top to the bottom to prevent my hand being on an area that's got pastel on it. Just sketching in the loose shapes. And already the hair's got a lot more vibrancy now. I hope doing that little lock of hair first was helpful for you. And no matter what hair study you're tackling, I would go through the same process. Of course, the colours would be different, but I'd do a little sample like this. And then before you tackle whatever hair you're drawing, do a little swatch, get an idea of the steps that you want to take, and then you can jump into it. Okay, now I'm going to jump in to using the mid-tone, and this is the 615. This was our brown ochre, and I'm going to start to use this to establish some of the shadows within these lighter locks of hair. You can see that some areas still haven't got any tones added to them yet because they are the really dark areas, so we don't want to really add the lighter colours to those areas. But we can go in and layer this mid-tone over the top of those darker areas. Start to add a bit of a base there. And even in these darkest areas, still look at the direction the hair's going in. And this colour looks quite saturated at the moment, but once we start to add in the darker browns and blend it, you can see that it does become a lot more muted. So I'm just filling in wherever I can see shadows. And you don't have to keep your pencil too sharp at the moment because all of this will be blended out. But when we start to add in lots of little details, you'll want to make sure that you keep your pencil nice and sharp. I'm going to cover up these white outlines where the shadows are meant to be. You don't have to have it perfect by this layer, so don't worry if you haven't got everything perfect and got in all of those mid-tones. But we are going to be going in and blending this out in a minute. I'm just adding the shadows to the bottom of the hairstyle. Okay, so I'm going to go in with the cotton bud that I used for this one, and I'm going to start from the top of the hair and just soften it out. And you can see that even when I'm blending, I'm still going with the direction the hair's going in. You can see that the graininess just melts away and it gives us a really nice smooth base layer to work and build on top of. If you don't have a cotton bud, then you can use a blending stump, or you could use your fingers. The only problem with using your fingers is that they're quite big, so you can't get into these little details, and you could get oils onto your pastel drawing. I like the cotton buds because you have more control and it doesn't get your hands messy. You can see how much smoother this top section looks compared to the middle and bottom section. And it's really, really important that you do blend in the direction the hair's going in, because if you blend the wrong way, then it will just blend out all of those pencil strokes and you won't get that hair texture. So it is so important that you do blend it section at a time in the direction that the hair's going in, that the pencil strokes have been drawn in. That is crucial. Otherwise you'll get a completely different look and it will blend out all of those lines, which is good for other types of drawings. For example, if you're drawing skin and you had pencil strokes that were shown through, you could go in circular motions and buff them out. But because we want the pencil strokes to show through, it is important that we do go with them, go in the direction that they are going in. So here I also just drew the outline of her top just as like a reference and to give context to the drawing. But we won't be filling in that area. I'm just looking around, seeing if there's any areas that I want to blend out even more, and I'm even blending the little flyaway bits of hair going onto the background. Just blending out the ends. Don't forget these ends. Okay, you can see that everything looks really nice and smooth now, and we've got a great base layer to build on top of. So now I'm just going to sharpen my lightest pencil. I just want to get them nice and sharp, ready for the next step. And I just thought I'd show you guys how I sharpen my pencils. So what I do is I'm just using this cheap, simple sharpener, just an everyday sharpener, nothing special. And I probably shouldn't be doing this directly over my work. I'll just put this piece of paper there just to protect the drawing. And whenever I sharpen a pastel pencil, I make sure to go really, really slow. I don't apply too much pressure, else that can break the pastel lead. So I go really slowly, and I check it after every few turns. Keep checking it. And I don't need to get it super sharp. The more you sharpen it, the more at risk it is of breaking. So I'll just sharpen it to that sort of width. And I'm just going to do that with my pencils. And I just thought this would be useful to show you guys, because a lot of people ask me how I sharpen my pastel pencils and charcoal pencils. I just make sure that I've really sharp sharpener so that the blades are really sharp, otherwise they'll just break. You want something that really easily sharpens them. And the key really is that you don't need to sharpen them too much. And I'll just sharpen this last one that we used. I mean, these pastels are really good anyway. These Carbothello ones, so they don't tend to break. So it might be the brand of pencil you're using and the type of wooden casing and the pencils themselves, that will do. Okay, so now we can build up our second layer, and what I'm going to do is just looking around at the reference and just deciding what I want my next move to be. Then we're going to go straight in again with the lightest colour and just use this to add a bit more coverage to those lighter areas. Just where those lightest areas are, because we just added our base layer, didn't we? We haven't added a really thick coverage of the lightest colour to these highlighted areas. We can always add more highlight to them at the end. But I do want to get them accurate so that it's easier to judge at other values. Now that we've blended out the highlights, they've probably got a bit darker because they've blended with those darker colours. You can soften out any shading that you do with the cotton bud as you go along if you want to. If you want to blend as you go. I'm not going to add too many details at the moment. I'm going to refrain from adding in all of the highlighted flyaway hairs, because there's no point. We need to add in all of the shadows beneath them. So I'm just going to get in those main highlights, and I am going to soften over them with a clean cotton bud, just to keep everything super smooth. Okay, now I'm going to switch to the second colour, the lighter yellow, and we're going to use this to add in some more vibrancy to the hair. So I'm looking at those lighter areas, just building up a second layer. And we are going to get into those darker colours soon. Okay, and now I'm going to switch to that mid-tone brown ochre, and we're going to start to really build up these shadows within the lighter areas of hair, getting in more of the details now. We will start to get in all of the shadows between these locks of hair as well. So we've got these wavy bits of hair that are in the front, but then there's lots of layers of hair underneath, and so these layers underneath the top layer are in more shadow, and so need these darker colours. So wherever you see the main locks, look behind them and see if there's any shadows that you need to get in. It tends to be that within each lock of hair, the highlights are towards the middle, and then we've got these shadows either end. And everything will really start to pop when you get in your darkest values. There's a shadow between these sections of hair. And adding in these shadows really helps to add depth to the hair and make it look 3D, because it gives it more of a layering effect. So it looks like the hair is layered on top of each other. So it doesn't just look like one flat layer. It looks like they are volumes of hair, which is really important. If you want the hair to look realistic, it needs to have texture and volume. Make sure you do go in within each section of hair and you do add some of these mid-tones. Otherwise that section of hair will look too light and it won't have any texture to it. So for example, this lock of hair at the moment, it's just got that base layer added to it. So we need to go in and just add a couple of details. There we go. Now we're going to move on to our darker brown, so our fourth colour, and this is where we're really going to start to build up those shadows. So I'm going to be adding a lot of this to the top of the hair. And we'll even be using the black in this area because it is really dark. You can see how this area is starting to pop so much more just by adding a few strokes with this darker colour. And that is because we have more contrast. Contrast is basically the difference between your lightest values and your darkest values. So if you have really bright highlights and then some really dark shadows, then you're going to have a higher contrast than if your drawing was just made from mid-tone values, for example. And it's so crucial that you have good contrast if you want your drawing to look realistic and to stand out and have depth. A lot of people think that to make something look super realistic you just need lots of detail, but that definitely isn't the case. If you haven't got your shadows and your highlights in and your values correct, then your drawing definitely won't look realistic, even if it has all of the details that it needs. Going in between these little bits of hair. And don't worry about any highlights that are going over the top of the shadows. We will add those in. Don't feel like you have to preserve them. Just look for the main shapes and the main values at the moment and block them in. And then you can add any little flyaway hairs and details afterwards. At this stage, it's really just about filling in the major values. And then we can definitely tweak as we go along and add in any little highlights over the top. So you've got to approach using pastels with a completely different attitude than if you was to use coloured pencils. With coloured pencils, it's very hard to layer light colours over the top of dark colours, so you really have to work from light to dark and preserve all your highlights. But with pastels, you really don't have to do that. You can jump back and forth between the colours and layer them as you please, so don't feel like you have to try and preserve anything. I mean, you may want to preserve some of the brightest highlights, just because when you layer the white over the top, you might not get it as bright white as before, but that would only be the case if you were using white paper. But I do think pastels is a great medium to try if you are new to drawing in general, because you really don't have to worry about anything with this. There's nothing that can't be fixed. The only problem is that they are very easy to smudge. So smudging is a problem if you've done work and it looks really great, and then it smudges. That can be frustrating, but that's why I use blending tools to blend, like cotton buds or blending stumps, and I try to keep my hand and arm away from any of the pastels so that I don't smudge it. Just looking around, seeing if there's any other areas that I want to add the brown to. I think I'm happy with it for now. Now I'm going to go in with the black. Really start to build up those darkest tones right at the top of the hair where it's really dark. Her roots are really, really dark, so we can layer quite a lot of the black in these areas. You don't want to add the black everywhere in the darkest areas though, because you still want to create that texture. So look for any little highlights where you want to see the brown peeping through. For example, in this section, I'm just doing a few lines with the black so that the brown peeks through. Because you want to transition between the colours. You don't want it just to be black and then go blonde. You need to have it go from quite black up here to black and then brown and then into the lighter colours. Especially on this piece of hair that's very windswept, there's quite a lot of shadow. You can even see some darker values in between the different clusters of hair. And remember, you can make the colour look more natural by layering the brown over the top of the black. Making sure to add the shadows right at the bottom. You don't want to forget about the tips of the hair, because there is some quite dark shadows right at the bottom here. And the hair's casting some shadows. Now I'm just going to go in with the brown. I'm just going to sharpen it a little bit. And I'm just going to go over some of these really dark shadows, especially throughout the bottom portion of the hair. And I'm just going to go over them with the brown so that they do look more natural. The shadows up here are okay because they're meant to be really dark. And they are pretty much black in the reference. But these shadows are a really, really dark brown, so I'm adding some of the brown over the top. Just to tie everything in together. Blow away any little bits of pastel. So now that we've finished adding that layer, I'm going to go back in with the cotton buds and I'm going to start to blend this out. And instead of blending from the top to the bottom, I'm going to blend the lightest areas first and then move to the darkest areas. Because if we started at the top, then our cotton bud would just get really, really dirty, really dark. And then we'd blend that onto the lighter areas. And it is okay if the lighter areas get a little bit of the brown and the darker colours added to them. But we still want to see that they are the highlights, that we want them to be darker than the rest of the shadows. You can always switch to the other side of the cotton bud if it gets a bit too dirty. So we're going to go over all of the highlights again anyway. And build up a whole other layer. Blend out the top of the hair. Keep blending with the direction the hair is going in. And I like to blow away all of the excess powder. And you can use a kneaded eraser to remove any of the pastel. For example, if it goes onto the background, you just want to erase it. A kneaded eraser is great for that. Or if it goes onto a lighter area, you can just lift it up. I mainly use the kneaded eraser just to clean up the edges. Now make sure that you've sharpened your pencil for the next step, because we're really going to start to render and define the hair more now. And I'm going to first go in with the second colour, and I'm going to start to go back over those highlights. Actually, before I do that, because that will be really finishing it off, let's go in with our darker colours again and just go over any of the shadows that we want to darken up a bit more. So just make sure that you're happy with all of the shadows, and then we can pull up the highlights and pull up the flyaway hairs to finish off this study. So go throughout the piece, getting all of the shadows. I like to blow away the excess as I go. can use the mid-tone as well to add some details to the lighter areas and to add more vibrancy. So I'm going in with our mid-tone colour as well. I really want to add this to these lighter sections just to give the hair more of a golden tone. You can add this to the lighter areas of the shadows and to add a few highlights throughout the roots of the hair at the top here. Now everything's really going to come together in the next few steps. At the moment we've just sort of blocked in the main shapes of the hair, but we haven't got in a lot of details, and the highlights have pretty much been blended out. We haven't got the really bright highlights that we need. I'm going to go in with the black. Just add a bit more shadow right at the top of the hair. Right at the top here. Just going to add a few more of these really dark shadows. And remember, we've still got to add in all of the highlights, so the shadows may not look like they're dark enough, but when you add in the highlights, the shadows look darker in comparison, and so the brown tones that you've got in might already be okay, and you won't need to go in and add the black. So just try and imagine what it will look like when you add in the lighter values. So I'm just blending out those black areas. Blow away all of the bits of powder. Okay. I'm just going to add a little bit of shadow under the hair here. Just blend that with my finger. Okay, so now let's start to add in the highlights and start to really give this more dimension and add a lot more detail. And so I'm going to start off with the second colour, and like I was doing here, I'm going to start to go over where these highlights are supposed to be. And this step will make such a big difference. And this is where we can start to add in all of the little pieces of hair that are sweeping over the top of the hairstyle, going over onto the black areas. And the harder you press on the pastel, the more it will show up If you're really light-handed, then it will look a bit more subtle. So if you just want subtle highlights or subtle details, then be a bit more light-handed with the pastel. Or if you need to add little subtle highlights over the darkest areas, then you can always use the mid-tone colour, like here. Or if you want to add details over the top of the shadowed area at the top here. So if you want really subtle highlights, just go one shade lighter than the base value. Or if you want to add stronger highlights, go 2 or even 3 shades lighter. And this step will probably be one of the most time consuming, but it will take the drawing up to that next level of realism and really make everything stand out so much. You want to add lots of little loose flyaway hairs as well. You don't want it all to be really rigid. Add little loose hairs that are going over the top, the different sections of hair. So at the moment I'm really getting in the main sections, and then I will start to add the loose individual tiny little strands of hair. And remember, we are going to go one shade lighter than this by using the lightest pencil. So bear in mind that we are going to make the values even lighter once we've done this step. So don't worry if they haven't gone light enough with this pencil. Got to make sure to add the little highlighted details right at the bottom of the hair. Also use the kneaded eraser to remove any smudges if you notice them. can switch back to darker colours if you need to. So don't feel like you can't switch back to some other colours if you notice an area that you need to make some adjustments to. I'm going to switch quickly over to the mid-tone value, brown ochre. Just add a few details just throughout these lighter highlights that I just added. Okay, now back to our second colour. I just want to add some little highlights around the edge. I'm going to add some little flyaway bits onto the darker area of the hair. I'll do more of them in a minute, but I just want to get in the main shapes first. So now I'm switching to the lightest pencil, and we're just using this to get in the brightest highlights. You can see how much brighter this pencil is compared to the second one, where you can see over here it's much brighter, so we can get some really bright highlights in using this pencil. I'm just looking around the study and identifying areas and little sections that need to go brighter. I'm just using this pencil to brighten them up a bit more, especially in the middle of the sections of hair. Add in the highlights right at the tip of the hair. And the highlights right on the outside here, and there is these few little highlighted pieces going over onto the background. Blow away the bits of pastel, and now I'm going to use those two colours, those two lightest colours, to add some more of the little loose individual hairs. So I'm going to start with the second colour, the 692, and I'm just going to go throughout the hair and just add a lot more individual loose hairs, starting by going around the hairstyle and adding these individual hairs onto the background. This really helps to give the hair more motion and to loosen it up. I'm also going to add little highlights over the darkest areas. And I'm just doing what we did with the last step on the swatch here and just going throughout the hair. And we just really want to give it more detail. This is the step where we're just adding a lot more detail to the hair. You can see how well these lighter colours layer over the top of the darker values. Just works so well. You can see that we've been able to create a really nice, realistic looking hair study, and this will be great to do no matter whether you're just focusing on drawing the hair or you're doing a whole portrait. You don't want to complete a portrait and the hair to let you down, so now you know a technique and a process to go in and create some really beautiful looking hair. Adding the mid-tone over this area. And a bit of the brown. Okay, so we're pretty much finished with the study now. You could go on tweaking forever, but you don't want to add too many details where it just sort of looks over the top. So try and not do too many details. Otherwise it may start to look a bit too much. You can go in with the darker tones and just fill in between these little highlights. Now that we've got everything in, you can see if you want to add any more shadows. You can even use these darker pencils just to add a few little flyaway hairs around the top of the hair where the roots are a bit darker, just to add a bit of variety. You can use these darker pastels just to clean up and sharpen up the edges of the hair a bit more, the edges of the locks of hair. You can go in with the black a bit as well. You really don't want to go overboard with the black. keep finding little bits that I want to adjust, and you could tweak this forever. And also soften over any areas. You can do it with your finger. Any areas that look a bit grainy, you just want to smooth out a bit. Okay, so that is it for this hair study and for this tutorial series. I really hope you guys enjoyed following along. Just making sure that I've cleaned up the edges. And so here you can see the final drawing, the final result of this tutorial series. I really hope you guys learn a lot from this tutorial and enjoyed creating the study yourself. And I'll see you guys in the next series. Bye everybody.